All right. Okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Semantic Kernel public community office hours. Always have to say public because it's a public forum. So don't say anything here that you don't want to, don't reveal anything that's private to yourself or your company. But yes, we have a very packed agenda. We have announcements. We have hack to announce, as well as obviously the questions that you have. As always, right, if you have questions that you want to ask throughout the session, just feel free to raise your hand or leave a message in the chat. We will try our best to get to it. But yeah, without further ado, let's start. Okay, so first off, we just completed the first ever Semantic Kernel Plugins Hackathon. So thank you all for participating. If you did participate, it's our very first one, and we anticipate us having more of these in the future. So definitely let us know any feedback that you have on how we can make it better. But we actually do have several winners to announce. So the winners will receive, we'll reach out to you by email, not only a custom Semantic Kernel t-shirt mentioned on our dev blog, a $100 Amazon gift card. And yes, we were able to secure at least some more prizes. But yeah, let's see some of the winners. So for the category most useful for the enterprise, we have Anthony winning with his submission NL2EF. So in the description, right, it's a plugin that translates a question into SQL, fetches relevant data from the database, and formulates a response based on the retrieved data. So it's aimed to be a drop-in plugin for organizations using Entity Framework, as it relies on the DB context to get information about the database schema. It's built with .NET 7. So would definitely invite you all to check out the repo. Just click on it really quickly to show it off. So being able to query a DB. Very cool. I think it's so the reason why we chose it as most useful for the enterprise is, as you can imagine, the number one enterprise use case is being able to chat with your data or being able to do things in a more natural language way over databases, files and all that. So we thought that this was a good addition, a good thing to call out. So again, congrats, Anthony. We will reach out to you soon. Okay, so in terms of, we had a most fun and creative category as well. So congrats to Josh Creek for his submission of a interactive Pokemon adventure plugin. So it's a text-based adventure, choose your own adventure type game. You making use of, let's just click on it, making use of the Pokemon API to fetch data about Pokemon for the game. And he says that the features, right? You can explore, you can battle, you can catch Pokemon, all in a text-based way. So very cool, very fun to see. But yeah, I mean, I personally like being able to see these type of fun use cases. So we want to encourage that sort of thing. That semantic kernel can be used not just for enterprise, but also for your own personal fun projects. So congrats to Josh. Okay, so we also have a community favorite, right? This is from the submissions, or from the Discord community voting for what they thought was a great project. So we have Christoph, Mike, and Lucas from Embed Elite for the Embed Elite Marketplace. So I see Lucas actually right here on the call. So maybe you want to just give the 1-minute description instead of me reading it.
All right. Yeah, thank you so much for voting for us. We really appreciate it. So yeah, the idea of this plugin is to connect semantic kernel applications or solutions with Embedded. And Embedded is basically a marketplace platform where professionals, let's say data vendors, can upload retrieval augmented generation solutions or embeddings for specific use cases. Think of legal, healthcare, or finance. So you could, for example, scrape all patents, embed them into a vector database, and then you would provide them as a product. And if there is a company or a user that needs to access the latest patents, for example, or legal court decisions, legal cases, and so on, you could just use the Semantic Kernel plugin to connect to that specific product. The vendor gets paid for usage, so it's fair for him, and you get you pay for your request. But usually it's so much lower compared to building your own embedding pipeline and data pre-processing pipeline to do all of this by yourself as a company or as an individual. And yeah, we use that plugin to showcase that it's possible. And yeah, really happy to be mentioned here. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, again, congrats to you and the team for building this. But yes, so these are our 3 winners, right, for our hackathon. We will reach out to figure out how to get you the prizes. And also, we want to feature you on the blog, so we'll try to find time to interview you all. Cool. So congrats again. And now let's go into more of the content. So, okay, so before we go into the questions, we have some announcements to make around, we have some new dev blogs. So if you go to the dev blog site, this one, yes, devblog.microsoft semantic kernel, you can see some of the latest that we have. We have one about the new, about the action planner, which isn't new, but we have a elaboration of it and how it compares to some of the other planners, sequential and stepwise. We also have an interview by our VP of Design, John Maeda, with team member Brian. And so one of the emphases that you will see us talking about for the rest of the year really is about plugins, planners, and personas. So with the hackathon, right, we covered plugins. Maybe there will be a planner hackathon in the future. But this personas piece is all about like what we will elaborate more in the future, but more like how do you incorporate memory to build a, let's call it more agentic or agent style behavior. So, I think it's teasing a lot of things, but I would, encourage you to check out that interview. The last piece is new into a new blog is about Azure Cognitive Search. So actually leads into we have some new videos that are out. So myself and Devis, we talked about the introduction of Azure Cognitive Search and their vector search capability with the semantic kernel. And full disclaimer, it would be the first party solution for your embedding vector database type needs and to incorporate memory in your application. So yeah, if you want to use that, I certainly encourage you to check that out, check the video and check the full announcement on the blog. Some of the other things that we showed off is also, this was announced during build, and I think it generated a lot of interest. And we have a very early preview of what does semantic kernel look like with prompt flow. So prompt flow is like this visual kind of tool inside the Azure machine learning platform that really allows you to visualize how you chaining prompts together, building your skills or plugins, how that kind of flows. And yeah, just is a way for you to not only do that piece, but also do that more MLOps side of monitoring and potentially experimenting with your prompt chains and things like that. So also, encourage you to check that out. And the last piece is the VS Code extension. So I don't know how many of you all are playing with the VS Code extension. If you haven't already, it's semantic kernel tools inside VS Code. So, but the latest thing, the latest feature is being able to have better support for custom native functions as opposed to semantic functions. Basically, if you have your Python, C# code and all that, you can now do the syntax highlighting and autocomplete and all that for your native code in addition to your semantic code. So I would, yeah, encourage you to check those out. Cool. Now with that, again, if you have questions that come up, please raise your hand or put in the chat. Otherwise, we have a very full docket of questions to go over. So I'll kick it off with this question from Carlos. So Carlos asks, I'm currently working on a Blazor server application intended to aid math teachers in Texas. The application serves as a database for educational resources, which I am populating through interactions with GPT-4. As an expert in mind, brain, and education, and having experience in teaching math, I intend to provide the right context for these resources. In addition to the resources, I've developed Unity apps to provide an interactive learning experience. I plan to integrate these Unity apps with my main app for an enriched learning process. To automate the process and enhance the user experience, I am focusing on refining the state management in my application. Currently, I'm implementing state management using a combination of cascading parameters, service injections, and immutable state classes. Moreover, Syncfusion components are being utilized for the UI. So I'm particularly interested in how to best integrate semantic kernel functionality in this context. I would appreciate any guidance on best practice for managing state in such a dynamic application and any feedback or recommendations on my current approach. Craig, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, so I think let's think about what sort of state might need to be managed in this scenario. So you have math teachers, the database for resources. So I don't think there's anything too extravagant that would need to happen here. So often with semantic kernel, we say per request, we create a new instance of semantic kernel. You don't have to do it that way. That's just how most of the samples and implementations we have done behave. There are some teams at Microsoft first party that are doing longer running kernels. I don't have good data from them on the pros and cons of that. But anyway, we do per request, new instance of the kernel. When you have that sort of scenario, the only state that you're really storing is what has happened previously. So if you're in a chat scenario, you might be saving chat history. You might be saving that in a regular database or some non-vector database. You might also be in a scenario where you do want to generate embeddings for those messages, and you will store it in a vector database. But beyond that, the model itself is stateless. So anything you send to the model is brand new to the model on that request. So I don't think you need to do anything too fancy here. You can still do dependency injection with semantic kernel. You could have it a new instance of that created for each request that you're serving. I don't think you're doing anything wrong. I think what you're doing sounds reasonable. And just think of semantic kernel as another library that you're integrating. You don't have to do anything particularly special in this scenario. So feel free to ask another question, Carlos. I don't see you on the call, but if you're watching the video later and this doesn't answer your question, post in the comments or ask us, and we'll give you a better answer.
Sounds good. Thank you, Craig. All right, moving on to the next question. So from Vaughn. So Vaughn asks, I'm looking for a skill/plugin that can interact with web pages in a more meaningful way than just sending all the links to an LLM. Something that can evaluate what links would likely be of interest and crawl them as well. I don't think one currently exists. If not, then getting the SK team's opinion on such a plugin would be great. Things I should consider before writing my own. What kind of sub-skills/methods would make sense in that context? My plan is to use Playwright Sharp as a base for methods like find relevant links, navigate, extract data, etc. Since HTML is nightmarish to interact with, since it's old and people do all sorts of inexplicable things with it, I've also considered using a library to grab an image of the page and an OCR the text from my extract method. I think that OCR is already possible/doable with the existing SK tool set.
Yeah, this one, so it's funny. I'm actually working on this right now, and I'm using Playwright. You don't need to use Playwright Sharp. I think that one's deprecated. You can just use a regular Playwright NuGet package now. And I've done this in the past where all I do is I get the text from the body on the page, so you don't have to worry about all the HTML tags. Although keep in mind, for a human, yeah, looking at this big chunk of HTML might be a nightmare. For the model, it actually gives the model extra context on what the structure of the page is, why there's content in specific places. So you have to remember, the human, you are not the one dealing with it, the model is dealing with it, and the more context you give the model, often the better the response is that you get back. Now, the challenge that probably a bunch of people on this call are thinking of is you'll have too much content. If you exceed the context window, meaning that you have more tokens to process than the model will allow, then you might get into a problem. So for my plugin, and I haven't quite finished it, but I was literally working on this 30 minutes ago. My plan is if it's longer than the context window, I'll measure the amount of text. I'm actually using Playwright to pull down the content of the page. If it's longer than the context window, I will chunk it, I'll summarize, and then I will run my query over the summarization of that. I don't need to use a vector database in this case. I could. Otherwise, I could just do it over each of those chunks independently. So good question. I actually think this is really valuable. We have an existing Bing, what do we call it? Bing connector, which has a web search module that it goes into. So you can do a search, you can find search results, which give you a basic summary of what was on the page. And then I think using this strategy where you give the link into something like Playwright, where it pulls down all of that page to get you, or I guess to allow you to find more detail, I think is a good strategy. So good question.
Craig, for people like myself who don't know what Playwright is, could you describe?
Yeah, let's drop a link in. So Playwright, it's actually a it is, I'm just typing in. It is a intended for testing typically. So you can do a web app and you can use this as a tool, chat, to automate like button clicks and these sorts of things on a web page. So any web page you have on the internet or locally, you can point Playwright at it. You can write a little bit of code so that Playwright can go and automate your web app. And it also knows how to pull down the contents of the page.
Nice, very cool. And you said Playwright Sharp is deprecated?
Yeah,
or
you don't need Playwright Sharp anymore. The Playwright NuGet package itself does support .NET.
Nice. Good to know. Good to know. Yeah, I mean, I love this type of example. I know early on when we were, before even us open sourcing this project, we were exploring just kind of different ideas. And one of them was effectively like a browser automation kind of example where, yeah, we encountered issues like, okay, we want to do things on the page, have the model, which can actually like, it already knows standard web pages like Amazon or Google and all that, and can already like, you know, if you just say a natural language, it could probably do something for you. But let's just say you wanted to put the entire content of the page in the like raw HTML. We've done that. We tried that. We tried also, I think, just extracting the body piece as well. But yeah, as Craig mentioned, I think more context is usually better. And you know, you'd be very surprised what these models can do just, you know, by themselves. So I think I would love to see this example, either Craig or Vaughn or whoever, if you end up publishing it. We would love to see it in the community. All right. So we have a next question from Surya. So Surya says, thanks for this open source library. I found from your documentation and GitHub issues that only a basic planner is implemented for Python currently, and support for using GPT-4 function calling isn't available yet in the Semantic Kernel. Is this true? We are looking for frameworks to orchestrate a GPT-4-based chat agent in Python Django environment that can use internal tools/services before sending a response to the user. Due to the previously described aspects, I'm wary of choosing Semantic Kernel to go forward. So we have Abby here, who can actually speak to what is the latest in terms of planner and all that for Python.
Hello. So I have answers for, I think, every question in this particular block. For function calling, this has been raised as a high prio issue for the sprint, so you can expect that on the Python side of things at least sometime this week or early next week. So that'll be in release 0.3.5 or 0.3.6, and we will release notes, making sure that you're aware of this. Then for planners, both sequential planner and action planner are in review and are near finished, so I would expect those to both be in the next release, or at minimum action planner will be. And note that the function calling and action planner are very similar. You could argue that function calling could replace action planner, but we'll address that later on. But yes, all of these things will be in within the next 2 weeks.
Great, thank you. And I guess for this piece about the Python Django environment and internal tools or services, before sending a response to the user, do you want to maybe speak a little bit more on how someone can think about creating this chat agent?
Could you repeat the question?
I'm just speaking from experience or things that you've seen, even what we do from the semantic kernel side from our learnings. Maybe do you want to give one word of advice to Surya as they do this?
Let's see. So one word of advice overall is, when I like to think of generative AI as almost an analog device. So whenever you're designing around these things, it is good to design for unexpected behavior. So unlike traditional software, you shouldn't expect some deterministic result given an input. So just keep in mind that sometimes something won't be what you expected or may not fit the system that you've put it in. And just to be aware that, hey, maybe it will hallucinate, or maybe it won't generate what you thought, or maybe it'll generate a little extra.
That's good. Thank you for entertaining me for that, Abby. But yes, so yeah, in short, Surya, look out for the next few Python releases. Hopefully, especially for Planner, which we get a lot of these questions for, especially for Python. Once Action Planner, Sequential Planner, and then eventually Stepwise Planner come in my opinion, we will have reached very close parity with C#. So a lot of people are, the subtext to this question is, oh, is Python behind C#? When will it be at parity? Can I take a dependency on it? Hopefully, right, with these sort of things, we will get even closer, if not there, for you to be like, yes, I can confidently use the Python version of the semantic kernel for my applications.
Alex, one question I would have on that. So on the .NET side, we say the kernel is lightweight, spin up an instance of the kernel per request. And maybe it's a question for Abby also. Do we consider the Python version also to be lightweight? So in this scenario where the Django environment's there and you've got a request coming in, would you also consider spinning up an instance of the kernel per request?
Yes.
Awesome. Good to know.
Yes, we like to keep this simple. All right. Next question from KevDome3000. So please shed some light on which way the team is leaning in regard to OpenAI function calling integration. How will it work with planners, kernel, SK context, function view? Function view seems redundant if the function definition class from the Azure OpenAI SDK is supported. Great question. I mean, Abby already touched on this. So we are currently in this sprint figuring that out. OpenAI functions, when they first were announced, I think we did this sort of like reaction to the announcement, and we noticed that there's a lot of parallels to what we've already done with the skills/plugin framework that we've adopted. So, but I think there's a lot of nice things that come with OpenAI functions, particularly like it's trained to output like a structured response, like a JSON response, which make things like planners more reliable. So, I for sure would say that we want to bring this in some way, and we're figuring out exactly what the downstream consequences are for all these other pieces of the kernel. But yes, good question, and again, stay tuned. Okay, next question. I'm also monitoring chat, so if there's anything, feel free to add. So Armando asks, hello everyone. I'd love to know if anyone knows how could I implement managed identities when using semantic kernel. I have a kernel and I'm doing my kernel.runAsync context plugin, but I need to implement managed identities and I cannot figure out how.
Yeah, so if this is a managed identities from the Azure side of things, that typically relates to a service on Azure. So I'm not sure how semantic kernel gets involved in that. Because so you can host semantic kernel in Azure function. You could host it in a Docker container. You could run it in a console app on a VM. You could run it in a variety of different ways. It doesn't really touch the managed identities unless we're talking about authenticating against somewhere. So I don't know if Armando is on the call and wants to fill in some details here. Let's see. I don't think so. Yeah, I don't have a good answer to this one. I would say if you're watching this video after on the recording, and you can add more context in the maybe YouTube chat or on Discord. I'm not sure how to answer it right now. I don't know, Alex, Avi, or others on the call if you have better answer than what I just attempted.
I don't. Does anyone else on the call, even outside the semantic kernel team, would you be able to help Armando out? Well, we will follow up. And Armando, if you're watching this, please, yes, reach out and give us more detail. We'd love to answer this question. All right, we have a question from YouTube, actually. So AJ AI. Hi, Alex. I love what is being done with semantic kernel so far. I have one question related to the end of the video where you mentioned some of the shortcomings of different planners. Are there plans to somehow incorporate OpenAI function calls into SK? It seems like they basically baked the stepwise planner functionality into the model with a fine tune. I'm curious how you see the intersection of this concept with semantic kernel. So it's related to what we've already talked about so far. AJ points out stepwise planner, which for those who don't know, it is one of the planners that's currently only in C#, but soon to be in Python as well. It is a planner that takes in the goal or the ask from the user and will keep running continuously until it achieves it. And it can even fail, or at least like in the execution, like one of the steps might error out or fail, and it will try to do its best to correct itself and keep going. So yes. So anyway, so how does function calls come into this? How does it make it better? Well, one, it will, I think, make it more reliable. So it probably won't fail as much. You're not spending tokens for the model to have to try to fix itself. But yeah, I mean, again, this is where we need to figure out how exactly this fits in. So yes, again, stay tuned, AJ and everyone else on the call. Okay, so we have a bit of a longer one from the real Savi B from Discord. So hi everyone. I just joined this community and I'm just now experimenting with SK and Azure Cognitive Search. I'm following the example in the repo to try to create a semantic search against the sample dataset I created an index, or against the sample dataset. I created an index and an indexer provided in ACS. I created a semantic config and everything to be used, and I do have semantic search enabled on my service. That brings me to my SK code using C#. I have all my keys and endpoints set and ready to go, and I tried following the example to connect to ACS memory, the SK memory plugin for ACS, but I keep getting the following error when running the code. I've attached some code snippets and the error message in this Swagger below. Do I need to be configuring anything else within my index or ACS to use .search async? Has anyone seen this or know where I can change the setting if it isn't a code issue? So let's take a look. This is what a person included in their error message. So unknown field embedding in vector field list.
Yeah, the only thing I remember is if you're using the free version of Cog Search, or you created an index before a certain date, it doesn't have the embedding functionality switched on. So two things just to double check. Make sure that you're not on the free tier. And I don't know if this is still true today, but it was true 2 months ago. I think you need to be on a standard deployment of Cog Search. And also make sure that if you did deploy it, say it was one from 6 months ago, I don't think it has embedding support. I think you needed to have deployed it within the last couple of months. So those are the two things that come to mind for me. Abby, anything from you?
Yeah, I think you called it out, Craig. The older version of semantic search is not based on embeddings, so the embeddings field is not valid. There is a newer release that is a true embedding or vector storage or vector index, and it could be a versioning issue here, or as you say, it could be a versioning issue of semantic kernel, or it could be a versioning issue of Azure Cognitive Search.
Good call out. So the library also, you're right, we had the older version that didn't do embeddings. Was this is 0.18? Did that? I don't remember when the new one came in. We could find out. Yeah, so I think, anyway, those are the two things to check. Check the library is the most recent one from the semantic kernel side, and double check the Azure deployment for Cog Search is not free. It has to be at least standard and is recent within the last month.
So I see Ryan put in the chat that ACAS doesn't allow for embeddings. I believe it is upload your own embeddings, right? Generate them using your embedding service of choice, like OpenAI, Ada, and then you upload them to Cog Search. And David says, I think basic tier Cog Search allows this one step below standard. Okay, but yes, good questions. Definitely make sure all the libraries are up to date. Let us know if something still doesn't work, if you're using the absolute latest of everything that we provide, and we will investigate further. Cool. Okay. So another question from Discord from R. Tome. I'm also having an issue with the newest Azure Cognitive Search release. Deleting collections, which is a new feature, doesn't always delete the collection. There's no error message, so supposedly it's working, and I can print the collection list after the call, and it says it's deleted. But the next time I run the app, some, not all, of the collections show up as still being there. So
yeah, please open an issue on GitHub, and we'll look at this one. This sounds like it could be a bug. Yeah, it's being awaited. That's fine. I would say open a bug, please, on this one on GitHub, and we'll take a look.
yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sounds good. All right. some more questions. Actually, we're close to the finish line. So again, if you have questions you want to ask, please put on the Discord. Oh, sorry, on the chat. All right, so we have from Sven. Sven asks, "Hi all, I'm wondering if the kernel offers an option to validate skprompt.txt together with their config.json to see if the prompt is, say, syntactically correct. I'd like to do this based on string or prompt template config variables and not based on files, as we load our functions from an Azure blob storage and only have them available as strings in our code."
I would imagine the answer to this is yes, because the Visual Studio Code extension does some magic to find the variables and things like that. I think it does some validation. We can ask the team in Ireland are the ones who would know the answer to this. I think it probably does. I don't know how to do it. So maybe we should get back also to Sven on this one, unless someone on the call happens to know the answer.
I do not have the answer. So yes, Sven, let's follow up and figure out, because yes, the people, Dublin, Ireland team, they probably will have more to say about this. But thank you for the question. Okay, we have one more from Discord from Ryan. Would it be possible, for example, would it be possible to, for example, run certain plugins only on certain models? I could see a case in which you want simple output, etc., to be done by smaller, faster models. For example, deciding which framework to use, SK or LangChain, given the capabilities listed, as well as the user query. I wouldn't want to pay for OpenAI's API there. I'd want to ask my simple llama running on my home server. Very good question, actually, because I think, for obviously anyone creating an application, right, using GPT-4 all the time might be a little overkill, and you might not even have capacity, or the response might be slower than what you want. And maybe like your skills or plugins can be better served, or just as well served using a cheaper, faster model. We have all these open source ones coming out, Llama, Falcon, etc., that if you wanted to deploy on your own machine or your own server, GitHub or GPU, you could, and then you just make API calls against that. So okay, but the question is, how do you do this with the semantic kernel? Is it even possible? So Craig or anyone?
Yeah, I think a similar question was asked recently, and maybe not so recently as well. We did have this concept of multiple model backends, and we did have this concept in the config.json that would allow you to pick which model that semantic plugin, I guess we're calling it now, would use. I don't know that it was ever wired up properly, and other people have been asking this question recently. And also someone on Discord was exploring this like router concept in front, which is basically what this is asking for. How do I route the request to the appropriate model, depending on whether it's a complicated one that needs planning and maybe GPT-4, or if it's a simpler one that maybe you could use Llama or something. So a lot of people have asked for this. Running the plugins on certain models is also a routing problem if you think about it. And the plugin itself may also have an instance of semantic kernel running in there. The plugin I'm writing for the web scraping thing that we talked about earlier is going to do exactly that. So you might have multiple places where the kernel is running and the request goes from one to the other as a new instance of the kernel. When you have a new instance of the kernel, you can pick whichever plugin you want to load at that moment in time that the kernel is created. So if you are doing per request instances of the kernel, you could have a decision that's done before the kernel's even instantiated as to which backend to load. And then all of the plugins on that kernel, as it stands today, would inherit that specific model. But this has been asked several times. I don't think we quite have the solution for it, at least on the .NET side implemented. I'm not too sure on the Python side what's happening over there, Alex or Abby.
Let's see. I would say, I mean, nothing unique from the Python side. I would for this in particular, other than because we have more native support with Hugging Face, with Hugging Face, you can use these local type models, maybe quote unquote easier. But yeah, this piece about like, if you have an application, right? How do you go from running something like a planner, which is instantiated with using the kernel is instantiated using a GPT-4 backend, and then saying, okay, I've done the reasoning piece, which is great. I used the powerful model to do that, the hard part. Now for the actual execution of the plan, I don't have to use that, heavy model to do so. I could use some of these cheaper ones. And this is where I'm speaking out loud here, so someone correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that if you have like the plan, right, and the list of functions or list of steps to execute that plan, you can potentially use a different kernel instance to run that plan. It doesn't have to be tied to the original one that was produced with GPT-4. Is that right, Abby or somebody?
For the most part, more so in .NET than in Python right now, due to issues or complications with serializing plans and whatnot. Also, we have this concept of being able to change your default completion model. So you can manually change that. We don't have any smart routing at the moment, which is an idea that we will take and see where that fits on our backlog task of things to do. But yeah, I would say like right now, you can manually say that I want all planner executions to be done on one model, plan generations to be done on another, and executions of certain run or invocations on yet another one.
And Abby, on that manual style, it's locked at that level, or how much control can a developer have, and how much control can a user have?
I would say that's highly application dependent. It's really how you build your application. I think you could give a pretty solid amount of control to the at the application level, a lot of control there. It really depends on how many hooks you give your user to be able to do that.
Mm-hmm. I think there's something there that we need to explore as a team and think about what tools we want to give people so that they can figure out to expose it either at the user level, at the back end control, or developer level. But there's clearly a lot of interest about hitting multiple models and sometimes even hitting the same problem against multiple models to see what kind of response you get. So yeah, let's keep working on that one too.
So David, I see on the chat that you've done some work on this area. Do you want to maybe come off mute to share?
Sure. Yeah, that answers that question about the context going between the two. That I haven't done yet. It is different. In the case that I was doing, it's two different sort of chat histories, each potentially using a different model and set of skills. But that actually is a good point. If I don't even know how you would do that, you'd have to kind of feed in the chat history to the new model somehow. I mean, you could certainly call the new model if you retain the old chat history and then send it all that history, but that seems inefficient. So that I don't think I know an answer to at the moment. I was actually going to type a response to that other question about the managed identities. And the only thing I can guess out of that is they're talking about the native skills or functions that you can plug in and having one of those potentially, calling some Azure service, using some managed identity. And that just comes down to typical sort of app dev configuration. And that's not really related to semantic kernel at all. That's my only guess on what they might be meaning in that particular ask there. Because otherwise, I don't understand why you'd need a managed identity to execute, or make a call to an LLM. So that's all I was going to say to that.
That's good. Thank you. Abby, go ahead.
I was just thinking, if there's one way, if you want to get really fancy and start perhaps playing with creating your own planner, you'll notice in, I believe it's stepwise and sequential planner, there's this concept of your skill or your plugins. You're generating embeddings or memories based off of those. So you could add some additional metadata saying, I want to execute this model or this skill plugin with a particular model, and then grab that as part of your custom plan execution path. Definitely for the more advanced user, but could be an interesting way to utilize the kernel as is to do what you're looking for.
Yeah, very interesting ideas. I see JS Bougie put something that I think is at least worth calling out. If you want to come off chat and share how to share about it, that would be helpful about this, because I saw it recently. This Uba Booga connector.
That was Ooga Booga. Is it
Ooga? Okay, yes, the Ooga Booga connector. But yes, if you could share that, or at least share the idea that you're talking about or thinking about, that would be very interesting. JS calling JS bougie. Okay, it's okay. But okay, I'll just read the question. So the Ooga Booga connector could be a first step in this direction of having certain plugins/functions run on specific models, and plans on proposing a custom connector that will figure out the smallest model of a list of various sizes under distinct ports for each semantic function. Would that make sense? Yeah, I mean, I'd be very curious what this sort of like model routing would look like and how that gets implemented. So yeah, if you have an idea for it, please share it out. Okay, so Ooga Booga makes it easy to host several models. Very cool. Yeah. Okay, new question comes from Steve. Steve, you want to just come off mute and just share?
Yeah, sure. Hi, guys. Yeah, I think I asked the Discord about the OpenAI functions that got released about a month ago with their latest version of models. I think probably a lot of people on the call could probably attest, as you start to use a planner and start to kind of parse out information from that planner. I've tried all sorts of different ways and trying to get the output structure JSON to be kind of consistent, right? And kind of nature of the beast with non-deterministic programming, right? You just can't always get, so you end up jump through hoops. Well, if it parses this way versus that way, well, truncate this, trim that, and it's a real pain in the tuchus, right? So it seems like the functions are exactly what we really need to kind of merge semantic and logical functioning together and coding together. And I think that, like, I'm really looking forward to seeing if that's, in active development by you guys. That's something that you guys are going to be working on now, or should I go self-roll something? I don't want to kind of do a bunch of work if you guys are already heading down that direction. And so, yeah, I just want to kind of see what the thoughts were there.
As Abby said, active development. I think one thing I'd be curious about, especially as we're talking about these other models, is this functions piece is a OpenAI specific, you can call it feature, but it's not guaranteed to ever translate to all these other models as well. So especially if you're all thinking about using non-OpenAI models, will this be, I'm just speculating here, will this be a reason for people to lock in to using OpenAI as a way to get more, high quality output, or, create better plans? I don't know. So this is just, curiosity in terms of the evolution of this space, how these model providers will end up differentiating themselves.
Yeah, I've gotten fairly lucky with, I guess, deterministic results in terms of asking to get structured responses back. It's one of the very first thing I did was this sort of example e-commerce application where you could, pretend you're going to like, I don't know, Kroger's website and buying some groceries. You can actually ask for recipes and it would, find some recipe based on its pre-training data. I was using the text Da Vinci model back then, but then I would say, give me back the results as a JSON object with these fields: recipe name, recipe URL, description, etc. And then I was able to get a JSON object back. And then I actually did a Lucene query to my, pretend product catalog database based on, and I realized, oh, I could actually have the LLM rate the Lucene query. And it was it never did not give me back a JSON object in the form I was expecting. It was all around the prompt engineering. So I used one of the, what do you call it, the core skills, not the .NET based ones, but the text based skills to prompt engineer, what I was expecting to get back. So I found that to be amazing. That was like the first thing I ever did. And I was like, this is crazy what you can do, and getting a structured response back. And obviously then the world is your oyster. You can do whatever you want with that. But that's worked so far for me in terms of making sure I get back what I expect to get back in the format I expected in. I have an example. I could share the SK prompt.txt file. It's kind of ugly, and I'm sure it could be done a lot better, but it's worked for me.
Feel free to, if you want.
Yep, I will upload it to the chat, the text file.
While you're doing that, question from Sebastian is there a way to set the temperature for the queries with the C# semantic kernel? Yes.
Yes. There's an object called complete request settings, or if you're using a chat model, chat request settings, and temperature is a parameter for that.
Very good. And Abby also, for fun, asks if anyone has cooked anything using a GPT-inspired recipe. I have not.
No, I guess I haven't actually followed through on any of the recipes that I did in my app, but it looked legit. I was kind of looking through the directions on what they told me to do in the ingredients. Well, what I found interesting though is this was again text Da Vinci. It would actually give me a URL for something like an allrecipes.com, and then I clicked the URL and it was actually not real. Like it was a fake URL, or maybe at one time it was real, but I doubt it just went away. And I could actually ask it though, give me one from Food Network, and it would give me that, but it was again a fake URL. So I found that kind of interesting, that it was sort of lying to me. But then the directions and the recipes itself looked real, so that was fascinating. So yeah, in that thing that I just shared, yeah, basically, I had to kind of train it because I wanted to restrict the input to people only asking for either a recipe or like a grocery item or list of grocery items. And if you ask for anything else, basically just say, I can't help you. I'm, not equipped to help you with anything else. But yeah, that part where I tell it to give me a JSON object has worked 100% of the time. The only issues I run into is if I ask for like 5 recipes, then the JSON becomes too long and I exceed the token limit. So it would give me broken JSON, and then my app would die. But, then I could just, then I realized, oh, I can just continue it and put it together and concatenate and all that.
Yeah.
That was the only problem I ran into there.
Very cool. Yeah, thanks for sharing this.
Mm.
All right, and with that, we are at time. So thank you all for joining. Again, thank you for everyone who participated in the hackathon. Congrats to the hackathon winners. We will reach out. And yes, continue to ask good questions on Discord, YouTube, wherever you see this. And yeah, look forward to seeing you all next time.
Thank
all
you.
right. Take
Thank
care.
you, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.